Hello and welcome to Tech News Today, or TNT. My name is Keith Parks. Today we're going to discuss the latest tech news and the business value technology solutions can provide. The podcast is both for technical and business executives that want to understand technology updates and what the impacts can be on their business. Today's session, a discussion on the race to net zero, how to tackle Scope 3 supply chain emissions. You know, with the supply chain being responsible for up to 80% of a business's carbon footprint, it is essential for organizations worldwide to step up and gain a holistic view and full visibility of their supplier activity and emissions to better fulfill their carbon targets. But how can businesses go about this? Where to start and how to track? Our guests today, Phil Redman and Evan Hearn, both with IBM, work with midsize and enterprise clients, understanding their sustainability options and the impact of their supply chains on their sustainability initiatives.
Tech News Today.
All right, everybody. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We've got a really good conversation wrapped around sustainability and Scope 3 emissions. We've got a couple of subject matter experts on the call today with us. Phil and Evan, if you could maybe just quickly introduce yourselves.
Sure. Thanks, Keith. Phil Redman here from IBM. I'm our IBM and Visi ecosystem lead, and I work with our partners and our customers on IBM sustainability tools and technology. Evan?
Sure. Nice to meet you, Keith. My name is Evan Hearn. I'm the technical leader for Invisi, one of two, got a counterpart in the West Coast. And I work across the Americas. So I work with our large customers. I work on training up our technical resources. I also work on sort of customer success opportunities. And then I also work with our product team to figure out, what's working, what's not, and then just evangelize on ESG and sustainability. So that's what I enjoy most about my job.
That's great. Well, so I throw around the term subject matter experts pretty loosely sometimes, but I love it when I get to talk to people that actually are engaging in the field with customers, dealing with real world problems, not just, book smart or software smart. So I really appreciate you guys' time today. We've got a webinar coming up today later on discussing Scope 3 emissions and really how to, involve your supply chain. Gentlemen, I know you're traveling today. Maybe you could just give us a quick overview, because I think it's really fascinating that you're actually at an oil and gas event of some kind, which, you could say you're actually in the belly of the beast, dealing with the, some of the major offenders on the planet.
Yeah, well, I'm in Calgary right now. We've got a 2-day digitization and AI oil and gas conference. I was here last year as well. And every year we watch the conversation develop in this industry. I think it's really fascinating that oil and gas is leading in sustainability in a couple of ways, right? For the last multiple decades over, they have been engaged in not only complex emissions regulation reporting. A lot of the engineering teams at these large oil and gas entities have been working to define what does regulatory practice look like. Those practices have either increased and decreased over the years, but right now they're living in a heavy regulatory space. And then now they're parsing that out with how does the ESG and sustainability landscape get navigated from a heavy and high footprint industry, right? So we think about them as the high contributors and some of the high impactors. But I think with oil and gas, the way that they are leading in this space is they're talking about energy transition. So they're going to lead on that front. And so they have to not only navigate the regulatory space and say, what have we done in the past that matches what we're doing in the future? Like the American Petroleum Institute's framework that they're developing in conjunction with the SEC regulations that are coming down the pipeline. And for those who may not know, it's really going to cover a lot of the publicly traded organizations in the US. And so if that's going to be the majority of the oil and gas companies in the US, they're going to get ahead of it and say, okay, what is ESG and sustainability reporting look like for us? And what have we already done in the past? That means everything from subpart W reporting in the US to other environmental regulations in Canada to really define, okay, we need to report on our scope 1, scope 2, fugitive emissions across our upstream, midstream, downstream. How are we engaging our supply chains? We also have complex conversations around the fuel chain, especially in Canada, where we look at hydrogen mixed fuels, across the fuel chain. So, when I get the question of, okay, well, you're at an oil and gas conference around sustainability, it's often funny. It's actually the conference I learned the most from, because we also go to Verge and GreenBiz, and I tend to learn the most from this conference because you actually have real engineers asking the tough questions, right? Like, why do we even need scope 3 or what? Like, why am I not, calculating my emissions using a stoichiometric calculation instead of a simply tagging a location-based emissions factor. So it's very complex conversations that we're having, and I tend to learn a lot from these kind of people. So
Yeah, I mean, because first of all, we all use oil and gas, right? At home, in our cars, traveling in the airplane. It's pretty indispensable in our lives. But, although there may be a bad rap, one, it's a very, like Evan said, it's a very heavily regulated market. So they've been producing reports and they've been talking about their carbon emissions for years. This is not something new to them, where for most industries, it is new. So they're one of the handful of industries where they have to regularly report. And there are fines and penalties, against that too. So again, that's a little bit different where the rest of us are just starting to get in the reporting. The second thing is, talking about scope three, I mean, that's a huge area for them, right? You think about, again, all the oil and gas that we use, we're their customers, we're their downstream. So they have to figure out kind of what we're all doing. And then the third thing I'll bring out is that, today there's, producers and generators, not just the ones that are, digging up the oil and the gas and bringing it to, but there are, utility providers that are using it that, they're already moved into renewable resources, so you could be in California at any time during the day and their electricity 100% is being produced by renewable resources, and they're all using renewable resources too. So they all have a mix. And so I think they get that. They're doing a lot of research in this space. And, let's hope maybe, 20, 30, 50 years from now, maybe it's not oil and gas industry anymore, but they're, electrical producers, they're renewable resources. They're all shifting into the new modern era. It takes some time, but I think they'll eventually get there because they're going to have to.
So number one is that you have a large green hydrogen plant that has a multi-tiered investment, like a venture partnership between a lot of oil and gas companies like Dutch Shell, Chevron, Exxon. I'm not sure who all is invested in it, but that's going to be the future. They're looking at green hydrogen. That's going to happen in Amsterdam. So they're already thinking about their fuel chain from a generation standpoint. And then number two, I mean, you have a large supply chain that these oil and gas companies actually create and facilitate sort of these microeconomies left and right. Yeah. So there's a lot of subcontractors from midstream, oil pipeline downstream, offshore drilling, onshore drilling. All of these sort of facilitate local economies across states and provinces. If we're just talking about, the US and Canada. And so now they have to think about how do they engage with that supply chain to figure out how they reduce emissions there, which even though that's a small footprint for these, because their main footprint is going to be scope one, they're thinking about scope three in a very complex way. And that's actually part of the conversation around AI is, can AI facilitate the automated decision making it takes to gather accurate data, centralize the repository, work with whatever cloud solution they have to not only ensure that the data structure makes sense, but that it's also traceable when it comes to assurance practices. And so I think something that we're doing that I really love, especially as IBM sustainability software, is that we have an Envisi supply chain that connects to our Envisi tool, which is our ESG tool. And this tool not only centralizes the collection of all transactional data from any customer that would leverage this tool, so that their procurement team has access to all their transaction records on top of an emissions calculation from those transaction records, so we can identify the spin-based or the average base calculation out of maybe like an SAP or like a Yardi ERP or any really ERP and financial system. And then collate that into a supply chain engagement. So here's what we purchased from the supplier from our transactional system. And then here are the suppliers that we need to send surveys to then start tracking the product carbon footprints of those goods that we purchased from them. And so then that tool is facilitating that interaction and then pulling all of this data after it's been pre-calculated in a separate emissions calculation engine into Envisi, the ESG repository tool, which can be used for sustainability analysis, measurement and tracking, and then reporting. So that's what I think is kind of the future and where we're kind of heading in that direction. I don't know, Phil, if you have anything you want to add there as well.
No, that sounds good. I think it's right on topic, and you're going to need technology for that length and that breadth of data that you're going to get. And so I think that's what they're looking into. Because I guess the one thing I will bring up is that, and you probably know this, a lot of the oil and gas, they have their own tools. Right? They're homegrown. And they're not digital tool developers, right? They're oil and gas extractors. So that's a whole different world. And so I think that what we're starting to see, whether it's oil and gas or manufacturing or other industries who've been reporting for a long time before they even knew about tools, is that they're starting to look at, new technologies, new capabilities. They're not experts in AI, right? And, we are here at IBM. And so we're infusing those technologies and innovations into these tools. And that's starting to attract them because they can see that there's more that they can do. Again, when we talk about scope three, and for those who are not sure what scope three right? It's one of the varieties of data that we have that we count for carbon emissions, and it's 10 times up to 10 times bigger than the rest, and it's a huge area that companies are struggling with. They're going to need new technologies to do that, and we're going to talk some of those on the webinar today. But some new technologies are going to be critical for them to succeed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just in doing some research, a couple of data points really struck me. The first one, that it seems that roughly 80% of a business's carbon footprint, or over 80%, is actually tied to their supply chain, which is really amazing to me when you think about just the scope, or the breadth of what the conversation could be. And the other piece was looking at the potential regulations that are coming down the pipeline, which could become pretty punitive eventually. Seems like it's a really good time to people not only understand their supply chain emission structure, but also how to identify it, how to make changes to it, and how to measure it going forward. Is that something you guys are really seeing going on in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody's talking about scope 3. There's no doubt about that. Between that and AI, those are the two hottest things in sustainability this year. And the regulations in Europe, CSRD, are requiring for those companies that have material impact with scope 3 to do that reporting. And so it's one of the first that we're seeing, right? And then we're also seeing what you mentioned, SEC, but that hasn't come through yet. That they're kind of taking that off the plate, right, Evan? I think.
Yeah, they're kind of taking that off the plate, but it's still going to impact CSRD in Europe. So you'll have US-based companies that still need to go out and track those specific scope 3 categories and get to that level of data quality that'll be audited and reported. And then thus the decisions that come from that are, okay, what tools do I employ to then further engage my suppliers, or open source data sets? Like maybe my supply chain has already submitted much of their data to CDP or to an EcoVadis, and I can go out and license that data or gather that data for reporting using a hybrid method. So there's a couple of methodologies that you could employ to then go about getting more accurate data. And then for those of you who kind of, maybe I'm nerding out a little too much here, which tends to happen, like Phil sees me nerd out all the time. So I tend to go down to a very molecular level really quickly. But if I was to take a step back here and talk about data quality in terms of scope 3, I mean, you really start with what are you buying, right? How much did you spend on it? What unit of measure was that? And or what currency was that? Was that in the euro? Did you buy it in Canadian dollars, US dollars? And then we use the total cost to assess the emissions calculation using some standard emissions factors. Then there's average, where we know the volume or the mass of the particular good. Then there's the hybrid methodology, which employs some calculations relative to what's already been reported by the supplier, like their scope 1 and their scope 2, which would be their on-site emissions and their purchased emissions, and maybe a percent that we've spent with them, and do kind of a more accurate granular calculation. Then there's the supplier specific methodology, where you're engaging with your supply chain to say, hey, have you done a life cycle assessment or a materiality assessment on this particular product or good or service that I purchased from you? And then so you're moving in the direction of more accurate, as you kind of start and then finalize your scope 3 journey.
You just geeked out totally there a little bit, Evan. I have to admit, I agree with you.
Well, and just for people, listening at home, so to speak, right? Scope 3 is so complex because there's 15 different categories, and it has everything from your employee travel, but also the two biggest ones are kind of, and these are all upstream and downstream that you need to measure. And just so if you didn't catch it, right, it's your supply chain, right? You are responsible for reporting on your supply chain and what they're doing, and then you're also responsible for your customers. And so just to think about large companies and the vast amount of data that they have, it's just a huge challenge for organizations to pull that out. And so what we're recommending is kind of a 3-step process. One is, and I think that's what Evan's kind of really been referring to, is building this data foundation, right? And that's critical because, again, most companies haven't done that. And what I'll say is when people talk about, hey, 96% of the S&P, they're already reporting. 1, they're not using tools. And 2, over 99%, right? Probably all of those reports are inaccurate because they're not including scope 3. Very few companies are reporting on scope 3 today. So it's missing a lot of data, right? And we've seen many companies have to go back and re-report or change their reports from year to year because of, they're finding new data that's impactful. So building that data foundation is the most important thing to do for scope 3, right? And it's critical. Next is streamline. So reporting and disclosures and, making sure that it's readable. You have 10,000 suppliers, right? You can't report on each of those suppliers. And so making sure you're hitting what's most important. And then the third, and I guess you can even consider this the most important thing after all that, what are you going to do about it? Right? How are you going to accelerate your decarbonization? That's what we're all looking to do, right? The reporting is not the end goal, right? That's the middle step, right? Building the data foundation is not the end goal. That's an important goal, but the end goal is how can we make changes? And there's lots of ways you can make changes, and that's putting pressure on your suppliers, right, to do better in this space, to reduce their own carbon footprints, to pick suppliers based off of not just, the quality of their product or the price they're going to charge, but also, what they're doing in terms of sustainability, or what they're doing in terms of other, social and other areas that are important to your organization, right? That are material to your organization. So let's just make sure we keep our eye on what's really important, is that gathering this information is all to make a change. And that's really key. That's really key.
Ultimately, the goal that would come out of it, like you said, is having your suppliers, develop better processes, et cetera, that at the end of the day produce a better product and or more cost effective, or just overall raise your profitability, because the whole supply chain is better for your solution to deliver to your customers, correct?
But it's about sustainability. And so, we were just joking about electric vehicles and lithium. Well, we want to have more electric vehicles, because, those, if they're charged up by renewable resources, those are completely carbon free, right? Yeah, there's going to be some carbon in the development, but I'm talking about operations. The operations are the biggest piece. I own a car for 10 years. That's a lot of carbon I'm putting in the air. The electric vehicle, it's down to zero. And so we want to make sure that in order to do that, it's a sustainable supplier of lithium, or a sustainable supplier of palm oil, right? So we have lots of products that we eat have palm oil in it. And burning down rainforests to produce this palm oil and to make room for palm oil isn't the right way to do it. And so a lot of organizations are looking at how they can make these things more sustainable for a longer term, not just for short-term profits. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
And I think, and just to add 2 points there too, I mean, when you think about it by industry, right, you have, and going back to, I guess, the electric car example is a great one. And I'll give another example of a way that, say, TNFD, which is sort of a natural disclosure framework where you're disclosing biodiversity impacts across your operations, right? And if you're a lithium miner and your in situ mine is causing, toxicity amongst the local agriculture, like I was talking to a coffee company and they're worried about lithium mining impacting a lot of the coffee growing operations that they would have. You have sort of a side impact across a different supply chain that you didn't think you'd impact as well. And so how do we measure and manage those as well? Do we call that climate impact? These are questions that are constantly being raised. And so when you talk about best practices, each industry, for sustainability reasons, is having to look at their supply chain and employ different methods, and also create different policy around engagement. And like you see that in the healthcare space, where you have large leaders going, okay, we're not going to engage with you unless you are aligned with, say, the water intensity reduction for Global Compact, or you're at least submitting your data to the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, and at least you have a plan for doing SASB and applying, science-based targets. And so then that policy becomes, if you don't do it by X amount, then you get cut out of the supply chain as a market leader. Walmart's doing the same thing through Project Gigaton. So you see it kind of all over the industry.
Interesting. Okay. Maybe I could wrap up with just a couple of final questions, if you guys don't mind. It seems that, involving your suppliers in the CO2 reduction efforts, that just seems to be a primary goal. Maybe talk about it from an IBM perspective also. Envisi is the product, it's a solution that helps to accomplish all this. Maybe give you just a couple of quick minutes to run through that, just to educate some of the people. There's other solutions out there, obviously, but you guys are experts on this area, so maybe just give us a quick overview.
Yeah, you want to start, Evan?
Yeah, absolutely. So Envisi is a ESG tool. It's been in the space for 15 plus years, purchased by IBM in 2022. Prior to the acquisition of Envisi, IBM had been leveraging Envisi to complete its ESG reporting. So we're talking about 50 billion plus company using Envisi to complete its ESG reporting. And so a very, very comprehensive tool. Envisi right now has a number of modules. So we have about 12 modules, and these modules define sustainability use cases like scope 1 and 2, utility billing analytics, billing ratings and benchmarks. Each one is designed to meet an organization of where it's at, and then grow with that organization and create standards around traceability of the data. So it's a completely auditable system. Number 2, employ standards from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and update the tool with all available frameworks and regulatory frameworks, as well as best practices for reporting and gathering the data. And then finally, just become flexible. So no matter which company we're working with in whatever industry, we can quickly adapt and quickly scale whatever hierarchy or reporting boundary they're looking to develop. So if they have different kinds of businesses, different different subsidiaries that they'd like to begin tracking sustainability data for. There's workflow tools in the system. There's already a completely integrated middleware that pulls data from everything from your organizational systems like your HR and your ERP systems, but also your third-party data aggregators. When it comes to scope 2, that's a common occurrence, right? How do I gather my utility data directly from the utility or directly from the utility bill? So very flexible in the integration. And so that's Invisi, in a nutshell.
Yep, I would say that kind of two areas that are differentiated. One is that, we built it right into our reporting modules. And so you see there are some standalone systems that are out there that are fully just looking at scope 3 and supply chain. And, those could be really great to look at that and focus on that. But you got to get the data into somewhere. And more we're seeing that regulations are requiring that. So building that into your reporting and your disclosure system is really key. And so we have that built right in and it can be brought in. So I think that's a differentiated thing. And the second thing is, this isn't new to Invisi. We've been doing this now for, I think, 3 years. We launched our first scope 3 capabilities. So we cover all 15 categories of scope 3 right into our reporting platform, into our sustainability platform. So I think that's a bit different than some of the others. And I think that's, key to the success.
Yeah. So it sounds like Invisi, just from a solution standpoint, would be a great way for a company to either start looking at how to do sustainability measurements from a carbon footprint standpoint, and obviously other solutions. But it also could be for a company that's already doing it to some extent. You mentioned oil and gas earlier, using their own tools, et cetera. Sounds like Invisi could even be like an ERP solution overall for how you manage your sustainability activities. Is that a great way to sum it up?
Yeah, it's a whole platform for sure.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, this has been a great time. Really good information. Any final words you want to leave for the audience as far as next steps or fear of what might come down from the gods at the SEC or other people that might really impact your business? You want to scare everybody before you go?
Well, one thing we're really focused on is the California Bill 261. We're also tracking a recent what I would call a federal procurement mandate for federal agencies to begin purchasing from suppliers that have reputable PFAS eco labels. And then we're also tracking, the SEC. So there's a lot to be afraid of. No, I'm kidding. But it is exciting. There's a lot of regulatory practices that we're going to have to learn. And it's keeping me up at night because I've got a lot of reading material and I can't quite get to my own book list. Yeah, that's what I would add. Phil, anything?
Yeah, I would say is it sounds pretty daunting, and it is, but you have to get started. So you just have to pick away at it. So, you have 10,000 suppliers. Don't start with 10,000 suppliers. Start with your first 100, right? And learn a lot of lessons that way. And so it's a big area. It's an important one, but it's all about one foot in front of the other. So without getting started, you're never going to get there. So just start now, start small and learn.
Well, Phil, and you made a great point earlier. Obviously, businesses, profitability, et cetera, that's always important. But at the end of the day, sustainability of the planet, keeping moving forward as a country and as a world of people, that is incredibly important too. So.
Yep, and we believe you can do both. So that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Both is good. Well, great. Well, gentlemen, really appreciate your time today. Fascinating topic. Obviously, we got webinars that are coming up on this, so it'll be really interesting to see how this whole genre continues to move forward from a technology perspective. Really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot, and enjoy your time in Canada.
Thanks,
you, Keith.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you for joining us on this Tech News Today session. We really appreciate your time and strive to provide valuable content. If you'd like to be notified when we post new videos, please like and subscribe to this channel. We produce over 250 technology events every year, focusing on the tech value and the good and bad impacts on business. Topics include cybersecurity, AI, cloud strategy, and other current technology solution topics. If you're interested in attending an upcoming event, please see the link below for a list of the upcoming digital events or send an email to kparks@innovateims.com. That's KPARKES@innovateims.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you on a future TNT session. I hope you have a great rest of your day.